Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the October 29th edition of the DAACAT. Dustin Rennert, so technical agronomist for North Central / Northwest Iowa, with my counterparts, Nora Schultz to the south and Jim McDermott to the west. So we'll go ahead and get rolling. Kind of agenda for today. I'll start off with a trivia question, then we're going to talk a lot about yield trends, performance stability across products, hit a little bit on southern rust, some nutrient removal rates, and then we'll wrap her up. So to get her started, here's where the audience participation comes in. So this is kind of a rule of thumb. So what percentage yield loss can corn experience for every nighttime temperature that exceeds 70 degrees? We speed up that respiration rate. What can we see as a percentage yield loss for those overnight time temperatures when they get elevated?
Yeah, and this seemed to be a factor, of course, this year. And, from when we had that high yield potential in late July, that's about the time some of these higher nighttime temperatures kicked in.
I see an answer in the chat from David for 2 bushel. I don't know, 2% or 2 bushel.
Dustin, I'll let you decide if you want to give it to him or not. That's a good answer.
That's probably a good answer. I guess I would say we're trying to hit for a little bit higher yield level, but really the rule of thumb as we think about those overnight time temperatures is a 1% potential yield loss. So 200 bushel corn, I guess, yes, we'll give it. Because realistically, as we think of as we get south of 18 towards Fort Dodge, we had a lot of 150 to 200 bushel corn. Where we got, farther north, obviously we experienced a little bit better yield. So,
David, that must be your mindset, 200 bushel corn. But yeah, that's.
I wish it was a lot more than that this year.
Yeah, yeah.
For sure.
Yeah, that's just it. And like I was mentioning, that's, I think from what our high hopes were, this was one of the factors, of course, so that continued to cut in as we got through late July and through the month of August on our, what we thought was going to be the top end yield.
Yeah. So, the number one yield limiting factor this year, definitely in the majority of the area, be it central, northwest Iowa, was southern rust. But we had a few other things working against this as well that maybe led this corn crop not to be up to expectations. Expectations were really high going beginning of July across the state. It looked like we were set up for a record corn crop, but then, the onset of disease, followed probably closely by a lot of crown rot in the area. And then along with that, we really had some warmer nighttime temps that we just raced this corn crop to the finish line. You did kernel counts. It really looked like we had some really good potential out there, but we lost a lot of kernel depth, kernel weight. We just didn't finish as well as we should have. We had some products that really melted as we got towards the finish line. And this is pulled from Storm Lake. This weather station must not have captured the daily temps, on the 16th and 17th, but this is roughly during the grain fill period. You can see in the month of July, we had 6 nights that were above that 70-degree temperature mark, highlighted there. So again, and then as we go to the month of August, again, we had some elevated nighttime temperatures as well. So I think there is about 11 there. I did a lot of these across Spencer, Algona, and this is pretty consistent for north central Iowa, probably 9 to 12 days that we experienced some overnight time temperatures that were, above 70 degrees. So again, a lot of things that kind of worked against this corn crop this year. And one of the big ones that we kind of forget, that we raced this crop to the finish line, be it losing all photosynthetic capabilities of the top part of the plant, from disease pressure, higher nighttime temps, and crown rot.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And what temperature does southern rust like? 77 to 85. You just see right where we were at for a good chunk of late July and through the month of August. And so, that the temperatures not only were speeding the respiration and forcing that corn to burn sugars with those higher nighttime temperatures, but that also just played right into the hands of southern rust, as well as the humidity that we were getting at that same time. So kind of a double whammy with both factors working against the corn crop.
Yeah, that's really why we've seen, such the progression of southern rust. You got to always remember the disease triangle, and we had the perfect environment along with the inoculum and a susceptible host, and blown up on us. So
yeah, just another chart, this one being Spencer, and highlighted there where the most of the month of August, well above normal on those nighttime temperatures. So that contributed to our humidity and contributed again to those higher respiration rates.
So a quick call out on all of those awesome weather charts. So the Iowa Mesonet is so wonderful to pull all of these charts. There's so much that tool can do. If you find it overwhelming, which is totally understandable because there are some days that I find the Mesonet overwhelming with the amount that it can do. Just remember those high temperatures, those are also on Climate Field View in your field. If you don't feel like learning, if you want the answer and Iowa Mesonet is a little bit much for you or your grower, don't forget you can go into past weather on climate.com and get that for each of your fields. So I just wanted to throw this in there when we were talking weather. I know, especially at harvest time, I think that we can get really locally focused, right? We're not going anywhere. We're really focused on our operations, and we can think, oh man, I'm the only one dealing with this, or why did this happen to me? And so I just wanted to throw this map up there that shows how unique of a year we were having over such a large area. The entire state of Iowa into Nebraska, into Illinois, and even through the Ohio River Valley was above average for precipitation. And so we can see that through the Dakotas, southern rust got all the way almost up to North Dakota this year. Like, that's wild. Almost in what's that northern county in Minnesota, almost to the border waters or whatever it's called. It's amazing what we saw this year. So when we're looking forward to next year, what cards, what chips do we want to play? What are your Vegas odds? But just remember, when we're looking back on this one, the amazing, hopefully we look back, it's very unique, right? And I just wanted to put a national spin on that as well, that the 20th, we were above the 20th century average, the third wettest July for 131 years for everybody. So it's been a roller coaster.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And just taking it to where we're at now, soil temperatures as of yesterday, really one of the first days it started to dip below 40, and this has changed. You look at the forecast, the weather forecast change, and of course that changes the soil temperature forecast. But as of this morning, really this is the only day, looking at the forecast going forward, that's actually anywhere at 50 or hovering right around 50. Otherwise, we are below 50. So it's definitely showed more of a cool down than what it was even a few days ago. And partly due to the cool rain soaking up that profile. But yeah, other than this November 3rd date, looking this morning on this forecast for 4-inch soil temperatures, it was 50 or below really for the next 2 weeks. So I guess that's positive. I think regardless, as soon as things dry out, it's going to be going hard with anhydrous and manure, which already has been going pretty hard. I think now at least looks like we've got the soil temperatures to keep that nitrogen a little more in place.
All right. Well, I just wanted to talk really quick about nutrient removal rates. And I've had a lot of conversations with dealers that, given the tough commodity prices, our tough yields that we saw in a lot of places, guys just kind of not sure what direction to go when it comes to fertility for next year. And then what the implications down the road. So when I'm thinking of fertilizer discussion, I think the base conversation that should be had is what left the farm. What is gone? What can't I get back? What went to town? And I think that sets a really clear picture and a baseline for what's going on in the field and what's going on in the operation. And so this is a chart that I actually pieced together from a couple different places. Ohio State University, Iowa State, and then a international Plant Nutrition Research Institute. And so you'll see there's a couple different numbers, and I did that because everybody was just a little skewed differently, and I wanted to shoot a touch on the high side. Like if I was gonna miss the goal, I wanted to just be a little high to have a little cushion, because we all know we can produce amazing crops with what God has given us in our soil. So want to make sure that we protect that going forward. So this is a chart for corn, soybeans, corn silage. I do think that maybe for silage and stover, we don't get enough credit to the potassium. So if you have guys that are taking stover, if you have guys that are taking silage, have a great conversation about potassium. That just takes an amazing amount of nutrient out. And potassium is really important, not only for soybeans, but for our stalks in corn. So the next conversation where this really came from was guys go, all right, well, I want to put a runner corn product on these fields that maybe aren't getting their removal rates. What are those implications? And there's going to be a lot of it depends factors. But when we're placing corn that wants to run for what we are planning to be a high yield scenario, we need to make sure some of these other factors are being maintained for those historic levels. We're not mining too much, because not just worrying about nitrogen prices, that potassium can influence something that maybe has a little bit of a lower stock rating than neighboring products. Do you guys have any opinions?
Yeah, I guess just to piggyback a little bit on that is, past life, I don't know if we've built up our potassium levels to where they should be. And I don't know, the last couple of years, I don't know if we could have had enough potassium. As you just raised those parts per million, those yields went right along with it. And obviously everybody's trying to get this crop to be in the black and for next year. And, phosphorus prices are elevated, but I just think of the growers that I've worked with over the last 3-4 years. I had several growers cutting back phosphorus because it was relatively high price the last couple of years. And then, we're looking at a pretty high price on phosphorus this year too, as well. So some of these growers out here are probably getting behind the 8 ball a little bit on phosphorus rates, because we've reduced those rates over the last couple of years. So really keep an eye on that as we move forward into 26. And really, we need to push those potassium rates as I look at about any soil sample that I would open up. You could go to the phosphorus charts and we're in pretty good shape, but our potassium levels are, lots of them in the hundreds. And it'd be nice to see them go over 200 parts per million and pushing 300 in some areas to really maximize yield.
We pulled some great beans. That eats a lot of potassium. We always, there's a lot of people that don't, they're weeds, and everyone's opinion. I happen to like soybeans, and they do require nutrients in and of themselves. And so, and I think when some guys have been spreading the same spread for many, 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 many years, and just as Dustin said, these yields have just gone up, 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 and we haven't really recalibrated our minds. And so this is a really quick chart, and I know for some of you, based on this year, you're going to go 270 bushel corn. What? We're capable of this. And I think that it's a good part of a conversation to set a baseline conversation of what does that yield goal need, and just really think about and make decisions that are informed. Every operation is going to handle the tight market differently, but at least if we're all informed, that's all we can ask. So, you're looking at, for those high yield scenario corn, 60 bushel a K just in the grain is leaving. It's Gandhi. For soybeans, there's a lot of people pulling 75 bushel soybeans, 90. That's nutrient K. It's not pounds of potash, nutrient K. So I could go on and on about this. So if anyone wants to talk, call me. I'll probably call Dustin or Jim too. We'll talk about this, but I think that this is an important conversation to have.
Yeah, the only thing I would add is, this year, we had good moisture in June, but there was still a fair amount of potassium deficiency symptoms that showed up once we started to really get that crop to take off. So even during that short amount of time, maybe it lasted 10 days to 2 weeks, but I think it still cut into some yield potential by having that even temporary potassium deficiency show. All right, we'll switch gears, jump into some data. Really got a few different ways to look at what's going on out there. We always like to compare to the competition, and usually like to look at the big picture. Essentially, this is you can see the area pulled, so a lot of northwest central Iowa, west central Iowa, and then a little bit into southern Minnesota, southeast South Dakota, northeast Nebraska, even. Looking at the key DEKALB hybrids from 96 day to 116 day compared to the main competitors out there. 95% of this data would be Brevant and Pioneer. And we don't win them all, but what I like to look at is that overall average. And I feel like that does show the strength of the portfolio. There's some good numbers out there from all companies. We feel pretty good about the depth of what we have to offer, and that usually tends to shine with a pretty decent win ratio, especially when you get this many comparisons, over 5,000 comparisons in that geography with all these hybrids included. And breaking it out by brand, Brevant, I'd say has some good hybrids there. This is where we're at as far as the Brevant comparisons. And then this would be the Pioneer, more Pioneer comparisons, but actually a little higher win ratio versus Pioneer as compared to Brevant. I think another key way to look at hybrid performance and how do you place some of these hybrids, there's a multitude of factors that you can look at and pull data on and slice and dice data, but I do like stability graphs. So these are simply showing, in this case, a head hybrid would be 101.33 versus the other DEKALB hybrids. This would be plus or minus 4 days of maturity. So everything from a 97 day up to that 105 day. So you're getting a pretty good swath of data, and then showing, okay, where does the 101.33 do relative to the other hybrids at different yield environments. So, and I would not be surprised by this yield curve with the slope here that we do tend to see 101.33 as having an advantage as we go into that higher yielded environments. Just a little bit more of that offensive minded product, decent stress tolerance, but overall its strength is in that high yield environments. Go through several other hybrids showing some of the same type of thing. So 103.07, this was as a product that as a Tricepta has really been gaining momentum, especially the last couple of years, and partly because of its southern rust tolerance. Again, like we've mentioned before, that's not the only factor to use, but it's sometimes you need to know where those southern rust scores come in, does explain performance. And you look at a yield curve like this on the stability graph, and you do see more of an advantage at that lower yield environment. And I think that probably is driven a lot by the southern rust tolerance. So as we got into some of these 180, 220 bushel yield environments, more often than not, that yield was suppressed by southern rust. But as a relative comparison, the 103.07 shined more in that environment with the heavy disease pressure. So sometimes, you look at stability graphs from previous years and you would say, well, this is the low yield environments is a drought, dry weather. Some years, like last year, well, the low yield environment was too much water, which there was some of that this year as well. But sometimes, you kind of have to know where the data is coming from and what the main factor is influencing a stability graph like this. Just flashing through a few others, especially some new ones. Going to hit on some new products here. 103.63, a new 103 Smart Stacks Pro. Definitely trending towards that higher yield environment. And by the way, you see the win ratios over here. The win rate in the lower yield environments, 31% against the DEKALB counterparts, and then a win ratio of 59%. in that higher yield environment. That crossover point being about 245 bushels. So another one that tends to favor a little bit more of the offensive feel, a little bit more of the higher yield environments, which you do like to see with your newer products. 106.98. This is an example of what you really like to see as far as across all yield environments. Very stable, no matter where we were at. And kind of reflects the type of year that a 106.98 had. Was able to handle the southern rust well, so I think that's reflected at that advantage on the lower yield side. Another new product, 107.69. So this one has been very solid agronomically, and one that's handled the wind, handled the disease quite well. Also favors more on the high yield environment, but still was able to stay above the mean, even in those low yield environments. Another new one, 109.71 as a Smart Stacks Pro at 109 day. And this one, as it came out from breeders, was positioned as an offensive minded hybrid, and it looked like it followed that trend. Definitely, it's really started to shoot up as we got past that 260 bushel yield environment. And then 112.35, another new Smart Stacks Pro, great addition to the lineup. Well, this one also favored that higher yield environment in general. Once it got up to about 240, then kind of leveled off, but still had a nice advantage over the mean. And then lastly, 114.42, and this would be a product that I would also put in that category of these lower yield environments, mostly driven by southern rust. This product is a little bit weaker on southern rust, so did not shine as well as we were in those lower yield environments, but then really started to rocket upwards as we got into those 260 and above environments. So always interesting. We've got a lot of these stability graphs pulled, not only DEKALB versus DEKALB, but DEKALB versus the competition. So it's very interesting to be able to look at how we analyze the data.
Yeah, I really like looking at them. It really helps you kind of place these products where they're going to perform the best. And I just wanted to throw a couple things out here as well. So, right now we're in the heat of seed selling season. We're going to get placed up against the competition. And this is pulled right off of Pioneer's website. So, you have 05737, 105 day. They're going to label it as a relative maturity, but right from their website, the physiological maturity of that hybrid is 107. Same with 10625, 110-day hybrid, right from their website, physiological maturity of 113 days. So we just need to be cognizant of this as we're placing products, that we're comparing apples to apples. So when I pulled yield data comparing these products against DEKALB hybrids, we can see as you look at 05737 versus 10414 and 10363 in Northwest Iowa, we're showing positive yield results to these DEKALB hybrids versus 05. But as we think about this, and if it's really a 107-day hybrid, we need to be placing 107-day products against this. And as we compare, our two new 107s, 10711 being Smart Stacks Pro and 10769 being the Tricepta option, as we get comparing apples to apples on a relative maturity basis, then we start winning that even more handedly. So just wanted to call that out. They play a little bit with those relative maturities, and we just want to make sure we're comparing like maturities and stack the deck in our favor, I guess.
Yeah, that's a good point, Dustin. And, this year, there's some fields, some plots that came out everything at 14, 15%. So you didn't maybe get that true spread of what the maturity difference actually is once we got to harvest moisture. As I look at data, look at plots as they go north, up along Highway 9, or as we get into Minnesota, not as much southern rust, maybe not as much heavy rain that shut the plants down early. Then there was that more typical moisture spread, and I think that's really, you know, you always want to look at data in your own backyard, but I think to me, it's very helpful to look at other areas because that might be the type of conditions you're going to have next year.
Yeah, and I just wanted to throw in the same thought process, I just shifted that circle a little farther south and east. So you guys that are with us in Squad 37 wanted to catch that eastern side. Same thing. And we use the Power Core version of 13777 up against a 114 and 115 for a better pairing. And we can see we're right there. And our new 115-55 is a great matchup for that with the health component this year. So same thought process, just wanted to shift that a little farther south and east for the rest of us in 37.
We always talk about corn. We always forget about beans a little bit. So we should have a little bit of a conversation on beans. So this is, looking at our core Extend Flex varieties in Northwest Iowa versus, the E3 platform. So you can see, 60% win ratios with a bushel and a half yield advantage to Extend Flex over the E3 lineup in Northwest Iowa. And we can do the same thing with the stability graph. So I threw up one of 19 XF3s, obviously has some offensive, showing a little bit better performance as you get into those higher yield environments. But you look at the disease ratings, its ability to handle IDC. This is just a good bean to go across all of Northwest Iowa. So we're pulling a lot of these too for stability graphs for beans to help with placement in 26.
You bet. And this particular one would be against the competition there. Yeah, and, we've been tracking Extend Flex versus E3 for several years. Obviously E3 has come up from the first years or two it was out. It does seem like in the last 2 years it's kind of stabilized right at about where you're at, or currently at that 1.5 bushel advantage and about a 60% win ratio. So it does seem like there is still a slight advantage. Certainly some good products out there on the E3 side. But as a whole, when you look at the big picture, it does seem like the advantage is to the Extend Flex. And just to finish up, a couple individual plots. One's a little bit more to the north. This would be a Dickinson County plot. Bring up one like this because there is a little bit more moisture spread. Everything's still fairly dry. Harvested here about a week ago, but let's see. As that 112.35 by moving north, that one's been doing very well, as well as the 114.42. This one you do see pretty good response to maturity. Overall, we haven't seen quite as maybe a clear cut as difference by maturity like we have some years, and we've talked in the past. So I think some of that is some of these full season hybrids didn't always get a chance to finish if they were especially influenced by disease. And another plot a little bit more towards the earlier maturity mix in Clay County, 106.98 in top on yield, but not so much on the dollar return per acre. Early one 98.88 was the number one on dollar return per acre, and this is kind of what I was mentioning. We've seen some really solid performance on these earlier products. Just ability to finish, and get to the finish line with a little bit more kernel depth than maybe some of the full season products. It just depends on where you're at, and that's just isn't as clear cut of trends as we do see some years. But that is where we wanted to wrap up. We're right at 8:30 on time, but flash up the QR code for half credit in crop management for those that need it. And then if you've got the other QR code as far as being able to get on the list for some of the regular agronomic updates that come out from the company.
We did have a question in the chat from Joel Nelson about the plan for Viconic in 2026 and ability to have in local plots. So for Viconic in 2026, we will not have it in local plots since due to regulatory approval. So it still has to be stewarded. So we'll still have yield trials, but it'll all be kind of in TDR sites. We won't be able to place that into local plots for 26.
Yep, appreciate the question, Joel. And still looking at that 27 launch, very limited launch as far as overall supply, and then 28 would be the big blow up year to ramp it up very quickly with large supply.
Because remember, even our production would need to be stewarded, right? It's not just the plot seed and stuff like that. It is a very intense process for stewardship management for reasons, I can't get out, but hence the large ramp up a year later.
And along those lines, government shutdown is what it is, but it's certainly not doing us any favors when it comes to Viconic or DICAMBA label approval or even Convintro. Some of those things that are on track. It's just been pretty well stalled out as of now. Still expect to hear positive news on the DICAMBA label front for pre and post here in November, but no way of knowing any sort of date. So wait and see on that, and hope for the best on getting the EPA back moving again. So appreciate everyone for being on. Congratulations, David Simonson, again for being a back-to-back winner. Always, I've got it on the list, and so there will be a fabulous prize coming your way.
Yeah. Thanks, everyone, especially the ones in ag retail. Now that ammonia season, stay safe. It's going to be fast and furious, I guess. So.
All right. Have a great day, guys.
Take care. You bet. Bye now.